Do you know this thing called fake news? It's real and it's a cancer. And what you learn about America is partly true, partly untrue. The fact is the majority of Americans love what America stands for. They love freedom. They love religious freedom. They love families. They love the rule of law. They love borders. They love walls. They think immigration should be purposeful and when you want it and when you need it. And that's what America thinks. And by the way, America believes that we have no greater ally in the Mideast and in the world than the people of Israel. But if you watch CNN, you might get a different idea. And here's what's going on. These forces are trying to divide America. They're trying to destroy us. They're doing to us what people did to you for centuries and centuries. They're taking down our statues. They're changing our history. They're telling us what's right is wrong and what's up is down. They're doing that to divide us and make us weaker and to turn the American cause into a global cause, run by the UN, run by the EU, run by the WHO, run by the elite to tell people what they can and can't do. I hope the people of Israel are rooting those of us in America on to save our country from these terrible forces. We're here in Israel to tell you we stand with you. We think the people of Israel should govern their own affairs. We think the people that come over here from New York City and the United Nations and tell you that you're filled with bigotry and hate should shut up and go away. And when we do these CPACs like we're doing here today, our goal is not to come here as Americans, and we got some great Americans. We have 2 cabinet secretaries for Donald Trump are here today who flew over with us. We have 3 ambassadors from the Trump administration, including close allies to Israel that are part of the Abraham Accords who are here today. And we have a lot of great Americans who are just rooting you on and trying to root us on. So here's the takeaway. Can we do this? Can we work together to make sure that this conservative movement that all of you have established in this country, that it can grow and blossom? Will you call on us when we can help? And will you tell us to go away when we can't? And can you do the same thing for us? Can you help us? Can you join with the freedom lovers of Korea and Japan and those brave voices in Hong Kong and the people of Australia and the people of Hungary and the people throughout Europe who are trying to do the right thing amidst all of these global forces that are in the way? And can you do something else? Can you teach Americans to be proud of why they're on this earth, to be proud of their history, to be proud of their founding? Don't let those outside voices tell you that there was no such thing as the great tragedies you've gone through, to tell you that the biblical truths we know to be right, that somehow they're made-up fiction. When we walk your streets and travel around your land, it's rekindled in us that this great human story that God started thousands of years ago has a purpose, and each one of us has a purpose. And part of that purpose is to stand with the people of Israel here today. It's our honor. God bless you all, and thank you for letting us be with you. Come on, man. You can beat that for sure. You can speak their language. I don't even know what I'm doing. Come on.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. And thank you and welcome to the biggest conservative event ever, I think, intellectual event ever in Israel. Thank you for coming to this historic event. It's an Israeli event, so from now on I will speak Hebrew. The first Hebrew speech in a CPAC event, ever. אז אנחנו ישראלים, ובניגוד למה שנעשה במערב, אנחנו הולכים ונעשים, החברה שלנו הולכת ונעשית יותר ויותר בריאה. צעירים ישראלים, מתחת לגיל 40, כמו לא שום מקום אחר במערב, מדווחים על עצמם כיותר מחוברים למסורת, יותר ימנים. אנחנו למעשה האומה הכי ימנית באירופה, שהצעירים שלה הכי ימנים באירופה. אנחנו האומה השנייה עם הסנטימנט הדתי הכי חזק באירופה, אחרי פולין. הכי פחות, דרך אגב, זה הבריטים. ובאופן לא מפתיע ולא בלתי קשור, אנחנו גם האומה שלא רק שמספר הילדים למשפחה שלה הוא הכי גבוה בעולם, באוכלוסייה היהודית, הכי גבוה בעולם המערבי, הוא גם הולך ועולה בעשור האחרון, בעוד בכל המערב הוא יורד. יהיה לנו, אני יודע. אבל, וזה קשור לנוכחות של מאט פה ושל סיפק, יש לנו בעיה, יש לנו אתגר. כי הישראלים הצעירים, הם מבינים שלהיות ימין זה לא רק לשמור על הגבולות, שיש לנו גם מוסדות שצריכים גם להילחם על זה שתהיה פה דמוקרטיה, דה-רגולציה של התקשורת, שוברים בחינוך, שוויון בפני החוק, איך המערכות שלנו נראות, ממשל ציבורי, הם מבינים את זה, אבל אין להם מוסדות. התקשורת שלנו שבויה בתוך גן סגור, חלק ממנה ממומנת, מה שלא ממומן תחת רגולציה כבדה, וזה צומח אבל לאט. על האקדמיה אין מה לדבר, המערכות ציבוריות תפוסות לגמרי, התרבות מסובסדת, ממומנת ותפוסה על ידי פקידים שלמעשה מחזיקים בקביעות לכל החיים. והמערכת הפוליטית גם כן נמצאת במצב משונה. במפלגות שנמצאות בימין הישראלי, בהגדרה הרחבה ביותר שלו, ציונות דתית, החרדיות, ליכוד, ואני אכניס גם תקווה חדשה ואת ליברמן בפנים, ראשי המפלגות האלה, כולם, מלבד אחד, נמצאים פה על הפלטפורמה של הפוליטיקה הלאומית משנות ה-90. ממתי שהשיחה פה הייתה עדיין סביב כלכלה מפאיניקית ואסון אוסלו, כן או לא. הם לא מכילים את השיחה החדשה הזאת, הם לא מייצרים את השיחה הזאת. אז בעוד יש לנו את הרוח הטובה הזאת, הרוח החדשה הזאת, אין לנו את המוסדות שיכילו אותה. ויבואו וישנו את הפוליטיקה בשביל לתקן את המדינה ולעשות את המדינה הטובה ביותר בעולם, המדינה שיכולה להיות. וכאן נכנס הכנס הזה, שמלבד איזשהו פלטפורמה לשיחה, שכוללת גם את השותפים האמריקאים שלנו, היא גם מקור להשראה. היא מקור להשראה כי האנשים שמגיעים לפה, אם זה מאט ומרצדס, שלאפ, שהקימו את סיפק, שזה היום פלטפורמת השיחה, הכנס השמרני הגדול ביותר בעולם, שלמעשה מניע את השיחה האמריקאית, ואם זה בן שפירו, שהקים תוך שנים ספורות, אימפריית תקשורת שמתברר לנו, לא את רק את השיחה האמריקאית, אלא גם את הישראלית. אני אספר לכם שאנחנו לא הספקנו לתלות השלטים בשביל לפרסם את הכנס הזה, לפני שהכרטיסים כבר נגמרו. כל מה שהיינו צריכים זה כמה מיילים ולפרסם את השיחות שיש פה היום, ואת השיחה של בן. אני יכול להניח שאם הוא היה רץ בפריימריס, סיכוי טוב שהוא היה, בפריימריס לליכוד, סיכוי טוב שהוא היה בחמישייה הראשונה. דרך אגב, זה לא בתוכניות וזה unscripted, אז זה לא כותרת לשום מקום. זהו, אז אני מקווה שהכנס הזה יסייע לכם לצאת עם כמה תובנות פוליטיות על המציאות שאנחנו חיים בה, בזכות האנשים המעניינים שמדברים פה היום, וגם שהוא יעניק השראה, ואולי יסייע להצית ולגלגל את אותה שיחה חדשה, שכאמור, אני מאמין, מתוך האירוע ההיסטורי הזה ואירועים נוספים, תבוא ותשנה ותהפוך את המדינה שלנו לטובה יותר. תודה רבה לכם. ואני רוצה להזמין את הבן אדם שאחראי יותר מכל ישראלי אחר על בנייה של התשתית הזאת, עמיעד כהן, חברי, שותפי להקמת הוצאת שיבולת ומנכ"ל קרן תקווה, האיש שבלעדיו זה והרבה מאוד מהשיחות שאתם מכירים לא היו מתרחשות. עמיעד, תודה לך שרביט אליך.
Yeah, stand up here. So I messed up, which I do often, but there's a lot of people who flew here from America to be here today to be part of this CPAC experience, to hear Ben Shapiro, to hear from these great speakers we have come from America. If you came from America to be here at CPAC, will you stand up and tell the people of Israel, turn around, stand up, and communicate by your applause your love for the people of Israel? Awesome. There you go.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you very much, Rotem, for the kind words. And I want to thank CPAC for coming here. But as Matt said, you're coming here to Israel, so I will speak to you in Hebrew. The core idea of what I'm trying to say is obviously the most important lesson that I learned from CPAC and from my mentor, Roger Hertog, that ideas matter. אבל בעברית צריך להגיד את זה בצורה ברורה יותר, כי בסוף אנחנו מדברים לקהל הישראלי. בסוף, כל פוליטיקאי היום בקמפיין הבחירות שיש עכשיו מנסה להכניס לאיזה גינה קטנה 50 אנשים, והוא מצליח להביא 20 ולהתחנן כשחצי מהם זה הצוות שלו. ואנחנו פה לאירוע הזה מצליחים להביא 2,500 איש בלי לפרסם כמעט, ולכנס השמרנות הצלחנו להביא 1,200 איש, עם קצת פרסום, נודה על האמת. תודה רבה. והצלחנו ב4 שנים האחרונות למכור מספר מטורף של 170,000 ספרים של רעיונות כבדים, עמוקים, ואולי אפילו קצת משעממים של הרבה מאוד אנשים. אבל מה זה מוכיח? זה מוכיח שיש דבר אחד חשוב בעולם, וזה רעיונות. כשאנחנו נתקעים מול קיר פוליטי, תחושה של תקיעות, תחושה של חוסר הצלחה, בסוף הדרך לעקוף אותה היא דרך הבנה נכונה של המציאות, ולחשוב, והברקות ורעיונות. זה קורה בהייטק וזה קורה גם בפוליטיקה. גם בפוליטיקה צריכים יזמות, ויזמות זה בעיקר לשבת, לחשוב ולהיות אמיץ מספיק לקדם את הרעיונות האלה. The fact that ideas matter, that's the influence that we learned from CPAC. That's the inspiration. That's what we're trying to do in the past couple of years here in Israel. We're trying to start here a conservative movement. A conservative movement that is under 40 in the meantime, but it will change, and will be entrepreneurial with ideas how to reframe the country, how to make Israel prosper. You know, when I go to the States, a lot of people move from New York to Miami for a good reason, to Florida. Florida has advantages. Israel can have better advantages. If we understand, and learn from the experience of the world and the most successful country in the world, the United States, how to form a government. Our war now is not on the fields. I'll go back to Hebrew, because it's important to say these things in Hebrew. המלחמה עכשיו היא לא מלחמה של האבות שלנו שהקימו את המדינה. המלחמה הייתה פעם לרוץ מול כדורים. היום המערכה האמיתית היא מערכה של רעיונות. איך מקדמים חזרה את האחריות האישית. personal responsibility, איך חוזרים לחירות, איך בונים את הקהילות, איך שומרים על מה שיש לנו ללמד את האמריקאים. Yes, Americans, we have a lot of things, I think, not me, the Israeli people, to teach Americans. We have the healthiest society in the world, and I think the most broken government. But in counter to fixing a society, that's very hard. To build families and communities, that's hard, and I don't envy your challenge. To build a government is simple, partially. It's not that simple, but we can do it. So first I want to thank the partnership here with CPAC. I want to thank Jay Schultz. Where's Jay? Jay. Thank you very much, Jay, for doing this beautiful event with us. And my partner, Rotem. And I want to thank you for coming, for emphasizing the importance of ideas. Ideas matter, and with ideas, with articulating the importance of Jewish tradition, Jewish nationalism, with the importance of liberty, free markets, and the importance of our moral and religious tradition, we can make Israel great again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you for opening our evening and giving us some words of encouragement, inspiration, bringing the energy. We're now going to have a panel called Conservative Judicial Revolution. Let's welcome Amir Ohana, member of Knesset for Likud, and former Israeli Minister of Justice.
Thank you.
Let's welcome to the stage Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Attorney General. Matt, I skipped you. Let me give you a handshake. I was looking away. Okay.
I'm here already.
And Dan Schneider, Vice President of CPAC. All right, gentlemen, so I'm going to leave you to it. Thank you for coming to the stage. Enjoy. Yes, I'm coming. Who needs a microphone?
Thank you.
Everyone?
We all do, yes. Now you can hear me, right?
Well, thank you all. We've really enjoyed Israel the last few days. We took a little bus tour, and somebody mentioned something about the West Bank, and I said, I don't know what that is. I only know what Israel is. You all might be thinking that we're going to have a conversation about heads of state, because our current head of state was just here, and you do not have a head of state. But we're going to be talking about something that has greater implications in the long run, the judiciary. And it is my distinct pleasure to be sitting next to two of the most relevant men in the world to discuss this topic. The man immediately to my left needs no introduction to all of you, former Minister of Justice, current member of the Knesset, Amir Ohana.
Thank you.
Matt Whitaker served as the U.S. Attorney General in the United States. And I will have to say, I don't know that there was anybody in the Trump cabinet who did more to save the Republic than Matt Whitaker.
Hello, Israel. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start off with a big, bold question for both of you. Please describe the balance of power that exists between the respective judiciaries, the Supreme Courts of your two countries, versus the elected branches in your countries. What is that today? How has it changed?
Go ahead.
Matt, please be my guest.
Okay, well, so in the United States, we have, sort of three co-equal branches of government. The Founding Fathers, in their infinite wisdom, and if you read the Federalist Papers, written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, mostly, and a little bit by John Jay, they would suggest to you that the judiciary was supposed to be the least powerful branch because they didn't have any way to implement their opinions. All they had was sort of just this idea of goodwill and following the law. The way it's evolved in the United States is we have had a complete shift where the judiciary has become very powerful, especially to the left when they control it, and it's where they go to accomplish much of their left-wing radical agenda, at least in the past. The executive branch has continued to ascend to strength by really unelected bureaucrats in the administrative state, and now they're finally on the retreat after especially this most recent EPA versus West Virginia case. And the Congress, which is supposed to represent the people and do their business, has been afraid to exercise that power by and large, and has become mostly just a place where petty individuals bicker about nonsense. And so, the Supreme Court, though, is going to be really, there's been protests ever since the Dobbs opinion, which was the opinion that took the court out of the life issue and returned it to the people through their representatives, which to me, exactly, that it was a big deal. Thank you. Thank you. To me, that just puts it back in its, we have a constitution that governs and is the supreme law of the United States, and it puts it back in that structure because for so long, the Roe v. Wade opinion for 50 years has stood as this anomaly in American jurisprudence. As I said, The Dobbs opinion, which repealed Roe v. Wade, returned the idea of constitutional jurisprudence closer to the Constitution.
So we're going in the right direction in America.
We are, but it's not without just some challenges. Conservative legal thought in the United States is not monolithic. You have kind of true conservatives, and then you have libertarians. And so you have these justices that, on specific issues, I think of Gorsuch in one case and Kavanaugh and Roberts in another case, are going to sometimes not always agree with sort of where the heartland of American conservatism is. But by and large, there is a 5 or maybe 6 conservative majority out of the 9 justices.
Amir.
Not only it is just as bad, it's much worse here. I would have to say that, thank you. If I would go to the starting point, I would go to 1977. In 1977 in Israel, we had what we call Hamahapach, the political upset, in which for the first time the prime minister was not from the left wing, but rather Menachem Begin, leader of Likud. But although since 1977 the right wing of Israel formed governments, it is yet to govern. Why is that? Well, now they miss Menachem Begin. They miss our leaders always when they are dead or irrelevant. There will come time, far from now, hopefully, that they will miss Netanyahu as well. But then, Begin was for them a terrorist, a fascist. Ben-Gurion wouldn't even mention his name, belittling him, saying, the person sitting next to MK Butter. So Begin realized and understood the situation he is in. And unfortunately, we have lost the battle between the judiciary and the legislature. Now, we want our countries to be governed by the rule of law, but we don't want them to be governed by the rule of lawyers, which is what we have now. Why is that? You know, I can quote a decision of the Supreme Court back at 1979, 2 years after the political upset, by Justice Aaron Barak. And he was saying the following words: the letter of the law is not a fortress that has to be conquered by dictionaries, but rather a package to a living idea that changes with time and circumstances, which basically means, who the heck are you, legislators, Begin and the Chachachim and the Asafsuf, that you would decide? We, the enlightened person, the educated person, we will be the one to decide, and this needs to change for us to be a democracy again.
Yeah. In the United States, the president nominates candidates to the Supreme Court, and our U.S. Senate confirms or rejects them. That gives the power of the people, all of you, an influence over who actually serves on the Supreme Court. I know that the Israeli system is crazy.
And it's quite unique.
And it's unique, and it's designed, it seems to me, specifically to keep the elitists, the snobs, making all the decisions so that you do not have a voice in your own government. A former president of Israel even said, and this is the English translation, maybe you all know it in Hebrew, cautioning people in the Knesset and elsewhere, if you try to pursue changes in the judicial system, the courts and the prosecutors will go after you like a gang. People who try to pursue reforms, to present a democratic process.
He changed.
They oftentimes get indicted. What are the reforms that are necessary in Israel? Matt, what are the reforms that the Democrats are pursuing to try to reverse these decisions in our Supreme Court?
So first, I have a 4-point program First would be the notwithstanding clause, that for once and for all, the last word would belong to the public by the representative and not to the judiciary. That's number one. Number two, the law of the Attorney General. We have a position much stronger than the Attorney General that you know in the States that is quite, I would say, omnipotent. This position is not mentioned is not arranged in a law. We need a law that for once and for all is stating what are the Attorney General's authorities, what are his boundaries, and that his opinion does not bind the government. This is sick. Did you know that the Attorney General decided that his opinion binds the government? The clerk appointed by the government is the one to decide for the Democratic. Now, you were mentioning that the judiciary, and I include the Attorney General in the judiciary, should be inferior because it is the less democratic one. It is the only one that there are no elected people within it. Now, when Montesquieu brought the idea of checks and balances and balance of power, he said it. He said that the judiciary should be inferior. In Israel, not only it is not inferior, it is absolutely superior. And this is something also that needs to change. Number three would be, of course, changing the way that we appoint judges. A system that is so...
Amir, I would like to interrupt you for just a second.
Sure.
All of you out there, and I'm just, as an American, I'm interested in how educated Israelis are. How many people actually know how justices are appointed to your own Supreme Court?
Well-educated crowd, yeah.
Yeah. This is really technical.
We have a committee of 9, 3 of which are Supreme Court judges. But to be elected to the Supreme Court, it's not enough to have a majority. You need a majority of 7, which means those 3 judges has a veto on who gets and who doesn't get to be a Supreme Court judge. Now, the system is so successful that the number of countries that adopted it is exactly 0. I want to see a system that brings more power to the people by the representative, to see a more pluralistic, a more diverse judicial system that reflects the beautiful mosaic of the Israeli society. That is what I would like to see.
Yeah, Amir, that's such a great point that I think about a lot about how judges are appointed both in the federal system and in our state systems, which are a little more diverse. But in no real situation can I think of one where there's a star chamber that picks a Supreme Court and without some representative of the people having a voice in that, whether it's a governor, whether it's a...
There is a part, you'll love this, their bar association has 2 members on that.
Oh, and yeah, the Bar Association, especially, in my home state of Iowa, had a stranglehold on a similar, it was called the Missouri Plan. You had half citizens appointed by the governor, half lawyers appointed by the bar, chaired by the non-chief, most senior judge that wasn't the chief judge on the Supreme Court, and it self-perpetuated even with that plan. So, it's good to come here because I learned that maybe our system's not as screwed up as it is. I think one of the challenges we have in the United States, though, is the idea of lifetime appointments for federal judges, because ultimately, while it does insulate them from the the sort of the ups and downs of the people, I think it also, that's the problem, is it insulates them from the ups and downs. There's no response to just really poor, rulings over a career or anything. These judges just do their job for life. And one of the things that both the major parties in the United States have realized is there used to be the cherry on top of a distinguished legal career was to become a federal judge. So you'd go in your 60s and you'd serve for about 10 years and you retire with full lifetime retirement, which was your full salary in the federal system. And both parties got smart and they said, well, if we appoint 40-year-olds, then they can do it for 30 years instead, and we'll have a much longer legacy. I think George W. Bush probably first discovered that, and then successive administrations have discovered that. And now the battle, if you follow American politics, is in the Senate, where the Republicans successfully held open the Merrick Garland appointment for a year. My home state senator, Chuck Grassley, who chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, successfully accomplished that. Thereby, we got a series of appointments, Gorsuch first, and then Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. And in those three, it really accomplished the goal of the conservative legal movement that was about 50 years in the making, that was training at a law school level, placing students and recent graduates in clerkships and really vetting them and then ultimately giving them the resume that they could qualify for the Supreme Court. And so, the biggest challenge that I see in the United States is oftentimes we are sold by the elites, by the politicians, that people are conservatives, and you can't really ever find anything on their record that is conservative. John Roberts is a prime example. He spent a lot of time at the Department of Justice, but really never had to make a decision. I mean, having run for office a couple of times, I've had to lay out my position on life and on taxes and all the kind of issues that are important to the American people. And so that type of record is important to know what kind of a judge we're going to end up with at the end of the day.
Amir, the United States has a constitution. It's an amazing document written 2.5 centuries ago. Israel has no constitution. Israel has Ottoman Empire law. It's got British law. It's got all kinds of laws. Is there any hope for Israel to adopt a constitution that will help resolve any of these things?
If you can find a vast majority of agreement within the Knesset, then yes. But unfortunately, I don't think it's anytime near. Because when the state was established, they were talking about a need for a constitution, but they couldn't agree about what would that constitution be. So the first Knesset brought it to the second one to bring the constitution. That was Hachlatat Harari, the decision of Harari. But the second Knesset was also not successful to bring a constitution. So throughout the years, we are now running for the 25th Knesset, and we still don't have a constitution. What we have is basic laws that were misinterpreted by the Supreme Court as such that brings power to the courts to abort and to cancel Knesset laws, which is very, very controversial here in Israel. Now they have a new sense of idea that they can even cancel basic laws. They didn't do it yet, but they said that they have the power to do that. Now, this is a judicial oligarchy. This is not
Do they have their own
democracy.
ability to fund themselves, or do you have to pass a budget?
Oh, that's a good question. The thing is that in this age, we politicians decide very few. The clerks and the judiciaries are the ones that decide. Why is that? Because in 1977, when I was talking about it, they did a very smart thing. Because Begin did not bring his own administration, but rather he didn't want to see the left-wing clerks and judiciaries getting fired, he said, stop, you can stay, you don't have to leave. Like in America, they leave, right? You can stay, but you will help me to rule. Of course, they ruled the country in their way, the Mapai, the labor way, but not only this, but they did a very wise thing. They vacuumed the power. They shifted the power from the elected officials to the appointed clerks and judiciaries. The elected officials was back then almost omnipotent, but now it is the clerks and judiciaries. This is the balance that I was talking about. to bring more power to the people, to have us as a country that governs by rule of law, but not by rule of lawyers.
You know, I know we're running out of time.
I don't know. I think it would go a lot longer. What do you guys think?
There are 2,500 people right here. And then I don't know how many countless others are watching us live. Israel is an amazing country, and it stands on the precipice of becoming the leader in the world. We've got some incredible members of the Knesset. Many I've met. Some have spoken at CPAC in America. I've met many here. Matt, as the former Attorney General of the United States, somebody who also knows about politics and the political process and about grassroots efforts and how the people can work to protect their own rights and to form organizations. What advice, and this is the last question I have before we run out of time, what advice do you have to the Israeli people? How can they influence their government and take control of this process and have a sound judiciary?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. So I speak all over mostly the United States and especially my home state of Iowa. And what I tell my fellow citizens and what I would suggest to you is I always say the future of the republic hangs in the balance. Future of the republic, the future of the United States hangs in the balance. But you know what? As I think about it and as I visit Israel, I think the future of the world hangs in the balance. The free world and people that believe in individual liberty and creating a future and trusting God to guide the way. I think that all of us have to do more now than we've ever done before. And we can't get tired. I remember how I felt in 2020, having been in the Trump administration, having watched that election not turn out the way we had hoped, and knowing that a lot of us, I did 4 bus tours across the United States. I did countless numbers of engagements, everything we could possibly do, and it came up short. And I just dedicated myself to not grow weary, not get tired, not think that it's somebody else's job to do the things that we need to do. And in the United States and in my home state of Iowa, it's very much a grassroots experience. It's knocking on doors, it's talking with your fellow neighbors, it's going to the coffee shop and engaging with your fellow citizens. And I think across the world, freedom-loving people have to explain not only what's at stake, but what the goal is, and if we get there, how life is going to be better for all of our fellow citizens and not just the elites. Because the elites are what are the people that want the world to trend towards, a totalitarian regime that only the elites control and that the ordinary citizens like you and I will never be a part of. So do more than you've ever done before. That is our calling.
Thank you so much, Israel. Thank you for welcoming us here. It's an amazing country and amazing people. Thank you.
Let's make our countries great again.
Let's make it great.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. What an interesting conversation. All right, we have a packed house tonight, okay? But we want to keep it quiet for our guests. They've come a long way from overseas to be here with us, so let's be respectful to them. Now we are going to have a panel titled Peace Through Strength. Let's have a round of applause for our next panel. I have a great honor of welcoming to the stage tonight former assistant to the president and special representative for international negotiations, Jason Greenblatt. Next up, please welcome Ambassador John Ricolta, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. and Ambassador David Fisher, the former U.S. ambassador to Morocco. And our delightful interviewer tonight, Mercedes Schlapp, Senior Fellow at CPAC. Thank you, Mercedes.
We're doing the mic swap. Shalom, good evening. Okay, so I'm a proud American, but I gotta tell you, my family and I, we love Israel. In fact, I think you're gonna see the Schlapp family keep coming to Israel every year. I mean, is this a great event or what? We are so excited to be here in CPAC Israel. It just shows the passion and the love for this country and for freedom. And let me tell you, this panel is called Peace Through Strength, which was President Ronald Reagan's foreign policy doctrine for freedom for all people. And it was President Trump who said that it is our destiny, that it is us, that we are the peacemakers, and it is only going to be peace through strength. And I am so honored to have such a distinguished panelists with me that are the, first of all, Trump superstars. We've got two Trump ambassadors who have broken the mold of how people do diplomacy across the globe. And of course, Jason Greenblatt, who is a hero, like just an American hero, and has done so much for Israel and U.S. relations. So gentlemen, what an honor. What an honor that you're all with us. So let me start with you, Ambassador Fisher. You represented the United States in the country of Morocco. How was it being a Trump ambassador in that country? What were you able to accomplish, and what did you learn?
Well, Mercy, thank you for inviting me up to the stage tonight. But if I may, I'd like to say a huge welcome from Detroit, Michigan to CPAC. We are thrilled to be here, thrilled to be in Israel, and proud to be here with my wife, Jennifer. And I can't tell you how much we've enjoyed this trip. I was able to represent the United States to the Kingdom of Morocco, our oldest ally. Now think of that. When you're a country, your oldest ally, it goes back to the Barbary Coast pirates. So to be part of world-shaking legislation, a proclamation from our president that unleashed Morocco's joining the Abraham Accords, probably will be the highlight of my life.
Ambassador Rakolta, your experience, you were ambassador to the UAE. I mean, that must have been a challenge when you were working through these negotiations on the Abraham Accords. Tell us your experience.
First, let me say how proud I am to be here on behalf of my country. I love Israel, have been pro-Israel my entire life. A little known secret, my son just married a wonderful Jewish girl, so we feel even closer today. And if it weren't for CPAC, I wouldn't be here. It's an incredible organization that I hope is able to come back year after year and build upon these fundamental core values that are so important to the future of your country and ours. Now, as far as the UAE is concerned, surprisingly, it was not that hard. The UAE and Israel have many, many things in common which they were able to build the Abraham Accords off of. And peace through strength is the core of all of it. It is a country that is steeped in the Abraham tradition, same core values, very tolerant country, and was looking for the opening to be able to forge a lasting peace, and we'll get into it a little bit more as we go through.
So Jason, You have a book that just came out yesterday. Okay, everybody go buy the book. It's called In the Path of Abraham. We're talking about this right now. It is basically your experience as you were the special representative, as a senior advisor as well to President Trump. You were in the room when these deals were being made. But there was a lot of myths, right, in this process. Be the myth buster. What do you want to talk to? What did you learn? And what do you want to tell this audience in terms of the myths that are out there and how we all have a responsibility to make sure that the truth comes out?
Well, first of all, thanks for the plug. Really appreciate it. I'm going to take you on the road. Let's talk about one myth, right? I had the privilege of touring Israel with my friends here and a bunch of people I see in the front row, a lot of CPAC folks. And today we went to what I call Hebron, in English, Hebron. If you could believe it, there are a lot of people that say, including UNESCO, that that's not a Jewish site. Can you believe that? It's ridiculous. So what we did is we busted that myth. We busted it in Jerusalem. We busted it from when President Trump made his first visit here, when the Israelis took the American advance team to the Kotel, and the American advance team told the Israelis, get lost, this is not Israel. Could you believe that? We changed that conversation. President Trump went to the Kotel. He put a prayer there. There are so many, he deserves it. Go ahead, applaud for him, he deserves it. There are so many myths about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israeli-Arab conflict that we learned about. Some of it we knew before, some of it we uncovered, and we exposed all of it. And I think that's the only way. It's peace through strength and also peace through truth.
Well, I had the great honor of working for President Trump in the White House and then worked on his campaign as well. And I will tell you one thing about President Trump. When he wants to get something done, he gets it done. And we need more leaders like him to be a fighter in this world that we live in. And I think one of the things when I have had a chance to spend time with the Trump ambassadors, these are strong men and women on the front line working in these countries. I think one of the things we were talking about earlier was the fact that there was so much bureaucracy. You know, government moves very slow. And so they were able to really accomplish a lot. Talk to us about how you were able to break through the State Department and be able to have effective change in your position.
Well, if you think about the being an ambassador for the United States government, at kind of a peak number, Jason, I think it's about 185, is that right? And there's about 35 political ambassadors. Political ambassador is appointed and asked to serve by the president, not coming up through the State Department, not imbued with different theories. I've been a businessman all my life. I come to a project with a goal in mind. I come to do something to get it done. It's why we enjoy being here with CPAC. There's something to grow here. I will tell you, when you go to a country, that country would like a political ambassador because they have a conduit to the leadership of the country. And that will help us get things done quicker.
Ambassador, also your experience with the State Department, how you were able to break through the bureaucracy and get things done.
Well, to try to add on what Ambassador Fisher just said, I believe that what we possess that a career diplomat does not is the ability to be able to take risk. We did not take the status quo. I think that Jason Kirchner is to be applauded in a great way. He had a completely new vision on how to achieve peace by bypassing the Palestinians and going directly to a country like the UAE, which was the first one. And so that ability to be able to assess the risk of doing that, willing to take the arrows if it didn't work, is something that's unique within the political ambassador realm. And I would also say that virtually every single State Department employee or worker that I dealt with was an incredible professional, was incredibly smart, understood the region and the dynamics. But where I was different from them is I was willing to stick my head above the firing line, and I really didn't care who shot it off.
So we know, I think President Biden came by Israel. I didn't see too much. What happened? We didn't. He came and went. I don't know. Oh, I love my Americans. And so let me ask you, Jason. He came by, and went to Saudi Arabia. I think there was some sort of deal, but we're not quite sure because he's begging for oil. We've given up on U.S. oil production, so he has to find new foreign resources. Do you think his trip was successful?
I'd give it a meh, right?
A meh. I like that.
On Israel, on the surface, it was nice. He said the right things. He went to Yad Vashem. He met survivors. That was all touching and nice. But where he missed big time is Iran, right? It's clear that Foreign Minister Lapid and President Biden do not agree. And, Foreign Minister Lapid is no hawk, but Foreign Minister Lapid was very clear, we're not going to solve the Iranian threat through diplomacy. And President Biden does not understand that. And I think a lot of pressure should be brought to bear on the Biden administration for that. Another thing he did is he went to the East Jerusalem hospital, similar to what happened with Trump, but we put a stop to that, without an Israeli presence. What does that mean? Is he saying that Jerusalem or parts of Jerusalem are not part of Israel? That's shocking, right? We need to speak up. Is he dividing Jerusalem? Is he not respecting American law, the Jerusalem Embassy Act? And then he went to the Palestinians and made all sorts of promises. First of all, he gave $100 million of U.S. taxpayer money. $100 million, okay? We need that money back at home. There's a lot of things we could do with it. And why is there no money to pay the hospitals? Because the Palestinian Authority pays Palestinians to harm and murder Israelis. I see right in the front, Sander Gerber, one of the key people. Sander, stand up. Okay, don't stand up, stand up. But Sander Gerber was one of the key people in getting the Taylor Force Act passed. A really, really important law on the books of the United States of America. Thank you, Sander, and for all that you do. On Saudi Arabia, look, he wouldn't admit he was going to see the Crown Prince. He wouldn't admit he was going to beg for oil. In the end, he did both. And I think the visit was the turn of a page. He has many, many more pages to go to fix the relationship he nearly ruptured. Saudi Arabia is a key ally of the United States. They should be commended for what they did with the flyover rights. I know as a proud El Al board member, it's going to save El Al a lot of money, save the passengers a lot of time going in that direction. And, I think his visit overall was okay.
What is it, meh? Is that?
Meh.
Meh. Okay, but the fist bump, seriously, what's up with the fist bump?
So he couldn't bring himself to shake his hand. I'm not so sure MBS wanted to shake his hand either, by the way. They blamed it on COVID, but he did shake hands in Israel, so it wasn't a COVID thing. They got a lot of heat for it. What are you going to do, right?
Meh. It's bad. Okay, Ambassador, let me ask you, we're talking about energy independence, something that America is very proud of. And now we've seen this obsession from the left in our country where they are focused on climate change. It is their religion. Forget God. It's about climate change. So what can America do with our international partners to ensure that our country becomes energy independent once again?
Well, the first thing we need to do is show leadership. There was an expression, wasn't it? Drill, baby, drill. I think we need to go back to an energy independent America. We need to lead the world with appropriate and consistent programs. We can't change every couple of months to whatever will be perceived. People cannot pay $7, $8 a barrel or a gallon for gasoline. We are going towards an electric vehicle economy that we can't afford. It will be hundreds of billions hundreds of billions of dollars to get us to a place. So we need to maintain a energy independent America.
The other part of this is we're seeing what's happening in Russia with the invasion in Ukraine. Ambassador, you brought up such a great point earlier about peace and prosperity versus war and invasion. Why is that so critical?
Well, history would tell us that anytime there's a war, there are casualties, there's death, there's destruction, and it's very difficult for the occupying army to then turn around and make friends with that country. We don't need that kind of a peace because it isn't really a lasting peace. There's a hatred that comes forth from it, and the amount of energy and capital that's required to fix what was broken is endless, and it leads to nowhere. The alternative is peace through strength and prosperity. Every human on this face of the planet wants a better life for their children, want a great education, access to health care, certainty of food, and that's what peace through prosperity actually brings for them. And I will say this, that the UAE and Israel have all the ingredients that is needed to be able to build upon that peace and prosperity. Israel is a startup, scale-up nation of unprecedented success. I can tell you that my experience with the Emiratis, they admire Israel greatly. They want to emulate Israel. Israel is the beacon of modernity in the region. It's a democratic state. You have things that the Emiratis want and need. They have things that you need, capital. And so the only pathway forward, and if you can demonstrate over the next few years how by tying these two societies together can make for a safer world, a safer region, you'll see other Gulf states and other Arab states join.
So you've been in the Oval Office so many times. You've seen the President Trump, you know, in, I would say, the most critical of negotiations and just critical moments. There was one story about the United Nations and the Refugee Agency. Share that story with us.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, President Trump did something very smart. He cut money to UNRWA. Why? Because it made absolutely no sense, right? The Palestinian so-called refugees are the only people classified as such generation by generation. And they live in these refugee camps. They have no future. They're used as political pawns, and President Trump had enough. He said the system is broken, it's a waste of our money, but he did it in two stages. He first did it by cutting half of it. And I had to meet with European ambassadors to Israel, European ambassadors to the Palestinian Authority, or what they call Palestine, and European ambassadors to Jordan. And in each case, they were shouting at me, demanding restoration of the funds and saying, why did President Trump cut the money? And I said to them, what you should be saying is, thank you, President Trump, for only cutting half the money initially and for allowing us to figure out a way forward. But you know what? They don't want to figure out a way forward. It's easier for them to write checks that belong to American taxpayers rather than trying to fix the problem. If I could share one more story about President Trump, I want you to understand, of course, we all appreciate what he did on Jerusalem and the movement of the embassy, but I want you to understand the behind the scenes, just how difficult it was. Yes, he made a promise like other candidates did who never kept it, only he kept it. Yes, he said he was going to do it, but from the time that decision was made until he actually did it, you cannot believe the volume of calls that came in to the president, to the vice president, to me, to Jared Kushner, basically saying blood is going to run in the streets, this is the worst idea ever, it's going to start World War III. So not only does he deserve a thank you for keeping his promise, he deserves a thank you for the incredible amount of pressure put up against him, all false pressure put up against him, and having the courage to follow through.
Oh, he would love that. I do want to say, and we're going to wrap up here with final thoughts, really, the people around the table, the president's advisors, you be proud of those Jewish senior advisors who stood by the president and gave him tremendous guidance and gave him strength to do the right thing over and over again for Israel. So I want to just take here, just quickly, if we can do a round robin, as we say. Final thoughts. What's your message to this most incredible audience? We're going to have to take you all to CPAC, Texas with us. Ambassador David Fisher, I'll start with you.
When you think of what a leader can do, when you think of what a great concept that can be followed, in our case, when the United States gave autonomy over Western Sahara, we were told much the same thing. It was going to be bloody. It was going to be terrible. There were going to be lives lost. All we got was congratulations. Don't be afraid to be a leader, to be principled, and to move forward.
Ambassador John Rakolta.
As I look out over this audience and I see the youth of today, I'm really encouraged about the future of Israel.
Yes.
You have shown the world that you can compete. Take the Abraham Accords and your great education system and take the fact that you are an individual endowed by God to be able to go forth and take this to the rest of the world, especially here in your region, and build the Middle East into a market of 500 million people who can live in peace and prosperity. That 500 million people, along with your ingenuity, your startup, your scale up, there's no telling what Israel will be 50 years from today. Good luck.
Final word, Jason.
So I was very lucky, right? I worked for President Trump for many years. I had a close relationship, David Friedman, Jared Kushner, so many of us on the team. I think David Milstein is here somewhere, Aryeh Lightstone, who's in Israel. Of course, we can't forget Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley. So many people were involved in these incredible historic things. But what we did is we opened the door. Now it's your turn. You guys need to become ambassadors for Israel, ambassadors for the Jewish people. Go travel to these countries. Let them get to know you. Let them get to understand you. Teach them. I remember a specific time I was with my son. He's now 23. He was maybe 19, studying at Yeshivat Kotel. He had a 1-hour discussion with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's trusted advisor about Jerusalem, about the Kotel, about the Temple Mount. The person had no idea of our side of the story. He was taught a certain thing. He was, I don't know, I'll say 60. He'll be upset. He's probably 65. He thinks he's 50. I have no idea. But he had no idea about the truth. You guys need to become emissaries. Speak respectfully, speak diplomatically, but speak the truth. Get out, go do your job.
Well, what a great panel. Let's give them a round of applause. God bless you all, and thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was absolutely encouraging, exciting, and I hope that everyone in the audience really feels like they are the leaders of Israel today. Now let's welcome to the stage Rick Grinnell, former U.S. Ambassador to Germany, former Director of National Intelligence, and Presidential Envoy for Serbia and Kosovo negotiations, and a former Tel Aviv International Salon speaker, might I add. He's going to speak to us about why the world misses America first, but before we get to that, we are very excited, both of us, about the move of Kosovo, which the ambassador had a lot to do with in bringing and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel. As a journalist, this was a very big news story, and it was very exciting, and Kosovo just recently made their move to bring their embassy to Jerusalem, and that is a big statement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It is very exciting to be here as a part of CPAC Israel, an incredibly historic event. If you take a look at this crowd, I am humbled to see such a great crowd. Thank you for coming out. I want to start by saying that I'm generally a positive person. But unfortunately, I have some bad news. You know, every great civilization has lasted roughly 250 years. America is looking at what's happening to it and wondering, are we at that point? And think about it. The end of American leadership, the end of capitalism, human rights, the rule of law, is a terrible thing for the entire world. I've spent many years in Europe as U.S. Ambassador to Germany. And let me tell you one thing about the Europeans. They have moved away from the West. They are solidly looking at a transatlantic relationship that is no longer Western-facing. And that is terrible not only for America, but it's terrible for Israel. We have Europeans who would much rather try to tell Israel about zoning issues. I got in a lot of trouble in Germany because when asked about settlements, I said, well, if the Europeans are going to start telling the Israelis where to build and how to build and do zoning issues, I'll have some advice for you in Berlin. I don't always think that your planning in Berlin is exactly what I would do. Do we want other countries telling sovereign states how to build, where to build? These are zoning issues for Israel and for Israel alone. The Europeans would do well to remember that. We don't need Europeans watering down our policies. The opposite of America First is consensus with Europe. Let me say that again. The opposite of America First is a strategy where we have to have consensus with the Europeans. You know, I heard over and over when I was in Germany that if Iran had a nuclear weapon, they weren't that concerned that somehow Paris or Berlin or Brussels would be bombed. Europe does not share the same threat assessment as America or Israel. And that's just a fact. Why are we going to negotiate our policy away, have the lowest common denominator of policy with people who do not share the same threat assessment? They do not understand the threats that America faces or what Israel faces. I will not be lectured to by people who don't understand that paying your NATO bill is important in order to be a NATO member. I'm outraged to see that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee of the United States has just passed through 2 more members of NATO. I don't think we should be adding NATO members when the current members aren't paying their fair share. Why are you going to ask the U.S. taxpayer to extend this security umbrella, pay for all of this, when the current ones aren't paying? The largest economy in Europe, the Germans, have a budget surplus, and yet they're not paying their 2%. That's outrageous. That is outrageous. The Germans also lobbied very hard for Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And this is where I always like to say, we in America believe in energy diversification for Europe, and a part of that is some Russian oil. Nord Stream 1 was appropriate. Nord Stream 2 went too far. We had a policy in the Trump administration to sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We didn't think it was smart. We thought that they were over-leveraging, getting over-leveraged by the Russians. But the government of Chancellor Merkel, Senate Democrats in Washington, D.C., and the Biden administration all came together to drop sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They also, the Biden administration, dropped the Houthis from the terrorist list. What kind of message does this send? What kind of message does this send to Putin? Well, I can tell you that in a few short weeks, just a few short weeks after the sanctions were dropped on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Putin saw a green light and went into Ukraine. I'm tired of seeing people complain about the war in Ukraine, the same people who dropped the sanctions on the pipeline, the same people who encouraged Putin to go in once again and try to rewrite the borders of Europe. I think it's high time that we have a discussion about the 16 years of Chancellor Merkel. We need to have a discussion. Is Europe stronger? Is the West stronger? Europe lost a member. The EU shrunk. Borders were rewritten multiple times. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to put more pressure on the Europeans who are trying to put pressure on Israel in undue ways. Try taking care of yourself before you start giving advice to other countries. We are tired of having Europe pull away from the Western alliance, calling it a transatlantic alliance. Nothing will anger Americans more than to watch the Germans move away from us and move away from the West. We have done too much to save Germany. Too many Americans have given everything. One of the highlights of my life as U.S. ambassador to Germany was taking my then 92-year-old grandfather to Normandy. And I should say to you, back to Normandy. Because when he was an 18-year-old, he left Marion, Ohio, to go and storm the beaches of Normandy. This is the sacrifices that Americans have made over and over and over. And all we ask is that you are Western-facing, that you fight for the West, that you understand that democracy, human rights, the rule of law, that is what we have in a partnership, and that is what we have in a partnership with Israel. I want to thank you for standing up. An Israel first and an America first agenda is exactly what the world needs. Never be ashamed of fighting for Israel. Just like I tell Americans, never be ashamed of fighting for America. I spent 8 years at the UN, and let me tell you, there's 192 countries that put themselves first. I've been in tens of thousands of diplomatic meetings. I've never been in a one where the other side doesn't ask America for something, and it usually involves money. I'm not going to be lectured to about putting America first by people who always put their country first. And no one should ever apologize for that. I just want to finish by thanking you for being here. I hope that you understand that we live in a world today where it's no longer appropriate to come and listen to some amazing speeches and then walk out of this room and hope that somebody else does something to save the Western world. We no longer live in that country. You have to ask yourself every day, what are you doing to save the Western world? We are under assault, and you have a role to play. You must speak out. You cannot be canceled. You must speak up and speak out. Because I fear if we have timid people, that we are going to lose the West, we're going to lose America, and we're going to lose Israel. Ronald Reagan told us that every great generation must fight for its freedom. I fear we have too many people that can't storm Facebook, let alone a beach in France. So I ask you to stand up, fight for your country, fight for America, fight for Western values, and never, ever apologize. Thank you very much.
What an uplifting talk. Welcoming back to the stage our salon partner this evening, Matt Schlapp from CPAC.
All right, there's a big speaker coming up. And he's really tall. Anyway, I wanted to just say a couple things. Did you notice there was a world leader that just went to Saudi Arabia and went to Israel? Joe Biden. Joe Biden decided that when he was traveling in Jerusalem, he would put your beautiful flag, the Israeli flag, on his limo in one part of the city. And then when he got to the other part of the city, he took your flag off his limo. When he went to a hospital, he decided that maybe the people, the good, decent people of Israel, didn't support going to a hospital. And he wouldn't let any of your officials be on that trip to the hospital, as if telling the world the people of Israel don't believe in taking care of other people. He went to Saudi Arabia. I'm not even going to talk about that hand gesture thing, whatever that was. He went to Saudi Arabia and did something that is shameful. He went to a leader of another country and begged for oil, for fossil fuels. At the same time, in America, where we have more fossil fuels than we need to light every light, heat every home, cool every home, run every car, but yet he's stopping the projects in America, making America more dependent on Mideast oil, and going to this country and begging for more oil. I want you to know that when you see that coming from our government, behind that government are millions of angry Americans. They're ashamed that our president would want to be Israel's friend in one place and act like he's not Israel's friend in another place. And you ought to know that in America, we're on to what's going on with our president and our vice president. We have a president who, I often say, can't read a cue card, and we have a vice president who has no clue card. And our promise to the great people of Israel and to this great conservative movement that's being built by the wonderful speakers here you've heard from these great Israeli institutions is come November, both in your country and in our country, help is on the way. God bless you all, and thank you for letting us be here in Israel.
It is an honor to bring to the stage a Tel Aviv International Salon fan favorite, Omri Caspi. leading Israeli businessman and the first Israeli-born player ever selected in the first round of the NBA draft. He'll introduce our main event for this evening. He'll introduce the one and only Ben Shapiro.
Okay. Hold it. What a beautiful event, seriously. Never been done like this in Israel before. 3,000 people. This is literally just the beginning. Amiyad, Shibolet, CPAC, Tel Aviv International Salon. Really excited to be here with you guys. I talked to Amiyad about it many years ago, and this was the dream. And God willing, like you really see all of Israel here, you know, the Jewish people, the not just Jewish, but, you know, this has never been done here before, so it's so exciting. I see Charedim and Chilonim and Tzionut Datit and really everyone. It's awesome. May you just continue to grow, and thank you for everyone who's been involved behind the scenes and around the world. So I have the honor, really, so let's tell you a little bit about Ben. So the conservative punditry for Ben started at the age of 16, where he started school at the University of California in Los Angeles. By the time he reached 21, he already published 2 books. 4 of his 11 books have been New York Times bestsellers. From 2012 to 16, Ben edited Brit Right News. Following the time there, obviously, he's the chief editor of the Daily Wire. And yeah. Today, Ben hosts probably the most popular podcast and live radio show in America, The Ben Shapiro Show. We frequently speak of university campuses, triggering a leftist, dismantling all of their arguments, go viral, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Ben left California. Oh, they say fled. They fled California to South Florida, and really excited. So guys, please welcome Ben Shapiro.
Great to see y'all. Thank you. Toda rabah. Thank you so much. Well, it's an honor to be here at my inaugural speech in Israel, or as I like to call it, my bar mitzvah. I want to thank those who are working so hard to spread intellectual conversation about conservative values in the Jewish state, and all the organizations involved with this event tonight. Shibolet Press, publishing the very best English language conservative thought in Hebrew. Stella Meir Publishing, bringing solid political literature to Israel. CPAC, with whom I've worked for years. And Tel Aviv International Salon, Israel's largest speakers forum. ותודה לכולכם שהייתם כאן הערב. Our countries have something profound and vital in common. They are both gifts from God, blessed by Him, founded in liberty, consecrated to the idea that He is present in history and that He guides history toward His ends. As George Washington said in his first inaugural address, no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than these of the United States. And as Menachem Begin told Jimmy Carter, what you have just heard about the Jewish people's inherent rights to the land of Israel may seem academic to you, theoretical, even moot, but not to my generation. To my generation of Jews, these eternal bonds are indisputable and incontrovertible truths old as recorded time. They touch upon the very core of our national being. But it's fair to say our countries also have much that differentiates us. And so tonight, I want to talk about something deeply important. What Israel can learn from America and what America can learn from Israel. So let's begin with what Israel can learn from America. Israel's an amazing country. Despite a complete lack of natural resources, a tiny land area located in one of the most dangerous parts of the planet, and a total population of 9.2 million people, Israel has the 20th highest GDP per capita on planet Earth. Despite its small size, Israel has one of the most effective and efficient and moral militaries on planet Earth, and one of the most technologically advanced as well. Israel ranks 13th in the world in unicorns, those are billion-dollar startups, and more startups per capita than any country on the planet. This is all due to the intelligence, hard work, and social capital of the people of Israel. Because it really is certainly not due to the economic system of Israel, which is kind of a dumpster fire. And this is the first thing that Israel can learn from America. Free market economics is a very, very good thing. Free markets work to strengthen the living standards of your people. America's dynamism is the result of a tax structure that benefits investment. Precisely the reverse is true in Israel. In Israel, the overall tax burden equates to 30.5% of total domestic income. In the United States, by contrast, the overall tax burden equals 24.5% of total domestic income. In Israel, the top individual income tax rate is 50%, and it kicks in really, really low. In America, it is 37%. In Israel, the top corporate tax rate is 23%. In America, it's 21%. In Israel, the top capital gains tax rate is 25% if derived by non-controlling shareholders and 30% for everybody else. In the United States, the capital gains tax rate is 15%. There is a reason that people flee Israel to avoid the taxes. And that doesn't even count Israel's value-added tax, which is 17% on goods and services. There's a reason, unfortunately, that a lot of people from Israel leave Israel in order to do business in the United States. And that needs to stop. This brings us to the second thing that Israel can learn from America, the second problem, the vast bureaucratization of the Israeli system. Americans avoid bureaucracy like the plague. America's regulatory environment, particularly in conservative-controlled states like Florida, is cheap and easy. To build a new home in Florida takes a few $1,000s in legal fees and filing fees. A residential construction permit might take somewhere between 5 and 7 days for a response. It might take a grand total of 6 to 9 months to actually build a home in the state of Florida. To build in Israel takes years upon years. On average, according to the World Bank Circa 2017, it took 15 procedures and 209 days just to deal with a construction permit in the state of Israel. There is red tape, and then there is more red tape, and then there is still more red tape. Every issue has to be run through several different departments, none of which seem to talk to each other unless you happen to have a brother-in-law who went to the Technion with somebody. And if you fall afoul of the law in Israel, or even if you're suspected of doing so, it's shoot first, ask questions later. Your bank account can be frozen, your assets can be confiscated, all without showing guilt. There's a reason that the World Bank ranks Israel 75th in the world in ease in registering property, 28th in the world in starting a business, 85th in the world in enforcing contracts. Which brings us to the third big problem, and the third big thing that Israel can learn from America. The unions must be broken. Nearly 1/4 of Israel's workforce is unionized. That's actually way down from the year 2000, thank God, when approximately 45% of all employees in Israel were unionized. But 65% of the public sector is unionized. In fact, overall, some 1/5 of all Israeli employees work for the public sector, which is well above the average for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Work stoppages are commonplace. They happen literally all the time. And the number of disputes and strikes and their cost are way above the OECD average. In the United States, more and more states have been adopting right-to-work laws designed at taking away special union privileges, freeing up people to work when and how they want. In Israel, unfortunately, the public sector unions punch way above their weight politically, and politicians are simply afraid to cross them. Which does raise the problem of how Israel's government runs. The chief problem here is not actually the political gridlock, which seems pretty common in most Western countries these days. The biggest problem is that an unelected bureaucracy seems to run an inordinate amount of policy in the state of Israel. That's because where the United States has an independent judiciary selected by the executive branch and confirmed by the legislature, Israel has a self-selected judicial branch that actually acts as a merger of the executive and the legislative branches. Thanks to the constitutional revolution of 1992, the Israeli Supreme Court can now rule out of bounds perfectly legal acts of Knesset, leaving an unelected, unaccountable set of oligarchs in charge of national policies in the name of a non-existent constitution. What makes this particularly terrible is a couple of things. First, the fact that the Knesset never even gave this power to the Supreme Court in the first place. And second, the fact that the Supreme Court picks its own successors, which is totally insane. In the United States, again, the president, elected by a majority of the Electoral College, selects justices to interpret a written constitution. Those justices are then confirmed by elected officials in the United States Senate. In Israel, the Supreme Court judges are appointed by the President of Israel from a list submitted by 3 Supreme Court judges, 2 cabinet ministers, one being the Minister of Justice, 2 Knesset members, and 2 representatives of the Israel Bar Association. Approval requires 7 of the 9 members of the committee, which means that the left-wing Supreme Court has complete veto power over anybody who is too moderate. Just as bad, Israel's Attorney General is selected by unelected bureaucrats, including a retired judge from the Supreme Court, a former Justice Minister or Attorney General, a Knesset member chosen by the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the Knesset, and an attorney chosen by the Israel Bar Association. I don't know where they got all this power, the Bar Association. And a legal expert chosen by university law schools in Israel. None of this makes any sense. It's totally crazy. The Attorney General has a 6-year term and veto power over Knesset legislation. Precisely none of this is what a judiciary is designed to do. Alexander Hamilton wrote of the Supreme Court of the United States that its job was to interpret the laws, not to make the laws. He wrote in Federalist 78, the courts must declare the sense of the law. If they should be disposed to exercise will instead of judgment, the consequence would equally be the substitution of their pleasure to that of the legislative body. The observation, if it proves anything, would prove there ought be no judges distinct from that body. Israel has adopted precisely the opposite principle to its own detriment. So, in short, America's governmental system is better than Israel's, and it's not particularly close. Okay, so now let's talk about the flip side of the coin. What can America learn from Israel? What can America learn from Israel, a tiny country of 9.2 million people, as opposed to a country of 330 million people? A new country established within living memory of many human beings? What can the most powerful country in the history of the world learn from a country with enemies on all of its borders, a country routinely described as at existential risk, a country about whom major political forces promote the possibility that it ought to cease to exist entirely? Well, the answer is that Israel has quite a lot to teach America. In the main, America has one major thing to learn from Israel, that a nation state must have, at its heart, a nation. And what that really means is that America has to learn from Israel the necessity of common history, common culture, and common destiny. It's a truism of politics that when you're too close to something, you see the complicated inner workings. Nobody likes to see how the sausage is made. From the inside, Israel has to look like a roiling country of disagreements and conflicts, of dislike and antipathy, of unbridgeable gaps where nobody gets along. From the outside, which is where I live, here is what Israel actually looks like. A country more solid in its identity than nearly any country on planet Earth. Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik famously spoke on Yom HaAtzmaut in 1956 at YU in New York. In that speech, he talked about the 2 covenants that bind the nation of Israel. Brit HaGoral, the covenant of fate, and Brit Ye'ud, the covenant of destiny. According to Rabbi Soloveitchik, the nation of Israel was bound by a covenant of fate, a, quote, strange force merging all individuals into one unity. A Jew, said the Rav, quote, cannot banish the God of the Jews from his world. Even if he desecrates the Shabbat, defiles his table and his bed, tries to deny his identity, he will not escape the dominion of the God of the Jews, which follows him like a shadow. That is the story of the Jews for over 3 millennia, a people bound together by common history and common culture. Whether Jews come from Russia, like my family, or Morocco, like my wife's, whether they come from Spain or Ethiopia, Jews share that common fate. They share a common history, a history that begins with Avram Avinu and is passed down generation to generation until the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai to Moshe Rabbeinu, a history that spans from the destruction of the First Temple in 586 CE to the liberation of Yerushalayim in 1967, a history that links the study halls of Yavna with the Yeshivot of Lithuania with the Talmud classes of Yerushalayim, a history that carries forward from the Egyptian Exodus to the ingathering of the exiles over the course of the last 150 years, and a history that connects from the Spanish Inquisition to the pogroms of Tsarist Russia to Kristallnacht to anti-Semitic pogroms in Lod. A history that links the martyrdom of Rabbi Akiva with the martyrdom of our great-grandparents and grandparents and parents and brothers and sisters in the Holocaust. A history that joins the vows of Paro to the vows of Haman to the vows of Hitler to the vows of the Ayatollahs and Hamas and Hezbollah to wipe the Jews from the planet. We can pretend that history doesn't exist, or that the world's Jew haters have moved suddenly beyond their hatred for the Jews. After all, they assure us that the Jews no longer need a state of their own, that we live in a more tolerant, kind age, that if only the Jews would give up their stubborn insistence on survival as a nation, everything would just be fine. Of course, these are precisely identical to the same people who make excuses for people who attack Jews at supermarkets in France and on the streets of Brooklyn and at checkpoints in Yehuda. Haman had the same complaints. Quote, "There's a certain people scattered and separate among the peoples throughout all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws differ from those of every people." So here's the thing. We can ignore history, but we ignore it at our own peril, because history does not ignore the Jews, ever. Israelis understand Brit HaGoral in a unique way. They understand it because history is around them at all times. They can run from it. They can pretend that Israel's enemies will suddenly put down their arms, that if Israel abandons Hebron or the Gaza Strip or East Jerusalem, that magically history will end. But history doesn't end. And increasingly, Israelis have realized this. They realize that the historic tide between the Jews and the land of Israel cannot be severed, even when it is broken. That no matter how much Israel may want to be the same as other nations, it will never be so. As God told the Jewish people, "And I will take you unto me for a people, and I will be to you God." Israelis understand this. They understand Jewish nationhood. The single best indicator of this fact is the fertility rate in Israel. It's truly an unbelievable fact. Israel, because it is comprised of people who understand the worth of their nation and its need for survival, represents the only Western country with a fertility rate above replacement rates. The only one. In fact, it's truly an amazing stat when you think about it. In fact, even the most politically left-wing areas of Israel reproduce at higher rates than other countries. In Tel Aviv, the fertility rate is 2.49. In Haifa, the fertility rate is 2.35. And as you would expect in Yehuda v'Shomron, the fertility rate is 4.58. Israel is a growing nation with a commitment to its own survival. By the way, just to put those numbers in context, the reproduction rate in Japan is 0.9. The reproduction rate in the United States is 1.6. Okay, so when I say that Israel's an outlier, I mean it is a wild outlier. Okay, then there is Brit Yahud, the second covenant. Rabbi Soloveitchik describes the covenant of destiny this way. He says, quote, "The beginnings of the congregation are embedded in the tradition of the people's ancestors at the dawn of its existence. Its end is rooted in a common vision of the end of days. The people of the congregation are witnesses to the events that have passed and to the miraculous future that has not yet arrived. The congregation encompasses not only those who are alive today, but everyone who has lived and who will live from the dawn of humanity until the end of days. The dead who have passed on are still alive within the confines of the congregation, and those destined to be born are already alive within its jurisdiction. A congregation is a holy nation that does not fear fate and does not live against its will. It believes in its own destiny, and of its free will sanctifies itself for its realizations." That's Brit HaGoral. Israelis share a common destiny, and they know this. It is embedded in their founding documents. It is embedded in the national anthem, literally titled Hatikva, the hope that is 2,000 years old to be a free nation in our land, the land of Tzion Yerushalayim. It is embedded in Israel's nation-state law, which calls for Jewish immigration and the ingathering of exiles, development of Jewish settlement as a national value, the Jewish Shabbat and festivals as established days of rest in the state, and which acknowledges that the state of Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people, in which it fulfills its natural, religious, historic right to self-determination. Israel is inextricably intertwined with the destiny laid forth for it in the biblical history that lays out its entire reason for being, to be a nation that embraces the book of the covenant saying, Na'aseh v'nishma. So what does that commitment entail? It entails a recognition that Israel has its own unique mission, a mission to recognize the special connection between Israel and the land, to fulfill the promise that if Israel keeps God's covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples, you shall be to me, a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now look, this doesn't mean the state of Israel ought to be a theocracy. It does mean that the state of Israel must always be connected to its Jewish roots, and it must be bound by the central principles of Judaism. To be a light unto the nations through virtue and responsibility, a beacon to the world through freedom and duty. Indeed, God keeps his promises. Israel is a nes. It's a tiny outpost of freedom and democracy and virtue in a region filled with tyranny and horror. It's a technological powerhouse, bringing new solutions and innovations to the planet. It has developed one of the two most moral militaries on planet Earth, along with my home country of the United States. So this is what America can learn from Israel. It can remind itself that its exceptionalism, its unique place among the nations, is not a coincidence. America can remind itself that it too has covenants of fate and covenants of destiny. America can remember that it was founded as a nation rooted in certain principles, the principles of Judeo-Christian morality on the one hand and the promises of the Declaration of Independence on the other. America can remember her own history and refuse to allow it to be undermined. And America can recognize her unique destiny, a destiny explained by Benjamin Franklin in his remarks to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, quote, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?" Indeed, America has spread freedom to more people than any nation in the history of the world. It has spread prosperity to all corners of the globe. America has liberated hundreds of millions and fed billions. That is because America is the greatest country in world history. America has a special history and it has a special purpose. But here's the thing. America is forgetting that history and that purpose. In fact, that history and purpose are being purposefully undermined by many people who despise what America stands for and who wish to substitute utopias of their own for covenantal destiny America represents. America is plagued with the view, common throughout universities and the media and major parties, I won't mention any names, crammed down by bullied corporations, that the United States was born in sin and corrupted through and through. That America is the country of slavery and racism, not the country of liberty and tolerance, that America's Judeo-Christian heritage are the source of bigotry and evil, and that those traditions have to be replaced by the cult of individual feelings subsidized by society, that America has no business on the world stage because it's imperialistic and exploitative. Those viewpoints have actually split America right down the middle between a country that sees the American flag and feels pride, and a country that sees the American flag and kneels in shame. Between a country that thinks that America was always great and a country that thinks America has never been great. Between a country that believes in absolute truths and accepted moral wisdom, truths like the simple fact that men and women exist and are not malleable categories, and moral wisdom like support for traditional heterosexual marriage and childbearing. Split with a country that believes that my truth trumps the truth, and that accepted moral wisdom is merely discriminatory dogmatism, that men can be women, women can be men, both can be chickens, and the summit of human existence lies in the subjective sexual self-definition of each and every individual. Between a country that believes that America's destiny can only be fulfilled if it holds true to founding ideals, and a country that believes America's destiny can only be fulfilled if America abandons those ideals in favor of a new approach to the world in which the only thing that matters is a perverse authenticity at odds with reality and decency. It is no coincidence, by the way, that those who oppose American exceptionalism also oppose Israel. 71% of Republicans have a positive view of Israel compared with 44% of Democrats and independents who lean Democrat. A majority of those under the age of 30, heavily Democrat, some 56%, have an unfavorable view of the state of Israel. That same group tends to fall heavily into the camp that believes American exceptionalism is evil. And that group is gaining ground extremely fast in the United States. So perhaps that's the last lesson that America can teach Israel. Do not let any of this crap happen here. For the love of God, do not let the left destroy the covenants of fate and destiny. Cling fast to your principles, cling fast to your history. Do not be led astray by those who bless themselves, saying in their hearts, I shall have peace, though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart. Instead, remember the covenants that make the Jewish nation and the Jewish state special. Recognize the principles that make Israel great are not far off from you. They are not in the heaven. They are not beyond the sea. They are embedded in your families, in your lives, in the lessons you've learned from your parents and from your grandparents and from their parents and from their grandparents all the way back to time immemorial. If you remember those principles, you will prolong your days upon this land. For America and for Israel, that is our life. That is the length of our days. America has never known exile, but the Jews have. And as Israel knows, failure has tragic, horrifying consequences. History is filled with pain and suffering, all brought on because Yeshurun got fat and kicked. But we have the capacity, Americans and Israelis alike, to choose a different path. We have the ability to choose life so that we and our children may live. Let us all choose life. If we do so, our enemies shall dwindle away before us, and we shall tread upon their high places. Thank you so much.
We at the Tel Aviv International Salon are very excited to have had such an excellent talk tonight. And we are not finished yet. We have a load of questions that you, the audience, submitted in advance. And in order to parlay those questions, we have a very, very prominent Israeli journalist amongst us. Amit Segal is a columnist, a radio host, a television personality, a writer. He does it all, and he is one of the most influential journalists in the country. Please come to the stage.
Well, I had a strange feeling because for the first time in my life, while hearing Ben speaking, I felt both old and slow. So thank you for that, Mr. Shapiro. How are you? How is Israel?
Thank God, it's amazing. It's terrific to be here.
Let's talk business. There's an old Chinese proverb, which I've just made up this morning, saying that two things are hardest to translate: poetry and politics. And you try to make a comparison between Israel and the States, but there is a problem. And the problem is that we are very different. And I thought on my way here that if US presidents were to be keyboard buttons, so Biden, Trump, and Obama would be Control Z. They erased everything their predecessors had done before. But in Israel, it's the other way around. I mean, Bennett and Lapid are Control C, copy-paste. I mean, allegedly speaking, it is the government of change. And there is a heated debate about Bibi, like there is a heated debate about Trump. But at the end of the day, when it comes to Iran, Gaza, settlements, economy, it's more of the same. So first of all, how do you explain this? I mean, it's like you in the States have two trains full of explosives come to each other, and we are the Hyperloop. I mean, we are without oxygen. There are no issues. What is it?
Well, I mean, I think that...
That was a long question.
It was, and I'm trying to suss out all the different parts of it, to be honest with you. I think that when it comes to America, the idea that each party sort of rolls back what the other has done is a result of the fact that everything is now done through the executive branch in the United States. No major legislation gets passed. That means that a president signs executive orders, the next president comes in, and he reverses all those executive orders. And this process just continues apace. In Israel, it seems to me that the lack of issues to argue over, in some ways, that is just a reflection of the massive success that you've seen in this country. When you have presidents who are sort of bouncing back and forth, erasing everything that their predecessor has done, if in Israel the real problem is that it's hard to identify the differences between everything everybody is trying to do, what that really speaks to is the fact that there is greater unity than there's ever been in the history of the state of Israel, which you see. I mean, when you, like, I was here in 2000. Right, the first time I visited Israel, I was 16 years old. We came in 2000. It was right after Arik Sharon had gone up onto the Temple Mount, onto Har Bayit. And I mean, there was an active left in the state of Israel that was promoting the idea that East Jerusalem should be given away. Ehud Barak was actively promoting that. That's unthinkable today. I mean, the Israeli public has woken up to this. I mean, the simple fact is that when I look at Knesset, obviously there's a difference between Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett and Bibi Netanyahu. But when I look at the constituency of the Knesset, what I see is a Knesset in which the left barely has a place. The left doesn't, and Meretz and Labor used to be dominant parties in Israel. Now they essentially don't exist.
Yes. Don't be too sad about that, by the way.
Oh, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm quite pleased.
Exactly. But there is another thing about it. I mean, you know, we already had our January 6th, and it was on January 6th, 1952, when hundreds of protesters from the right wing actually stormed the Knesset with stones, led by Menachem Begin, the soon-to-be prime minister. We had heated debates. Sharon going to the Temple Mount, the disengagement plan, Oslo Accords, Rabin was murdered. But now, I feel we're like the States 20 years ago when you couldn't even find, the slightest difference between Al Gore and George Bush, for instance.
I think that that's true, although I would actually argue that the big differences in the United States, you're right, that they started to emerge after Bush and Gore. But the real beginning of major problems for the United States actually began to arise at the end of the Cold War, because the Cold War provided a unifying impetus inside the United States. At the end of the Cold War, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States was the unchallenged global hegemon. And that meant that there was, there were going to be new arguments in which people sort of went after one another. In Israel, almost the precise reverse occurred. After Oslo, you saw the rise of this really serious post-Zionist movement that basically said that Israel didn't even, why should it exist? Should it exist? These questions were really being asked in the late 90s when I was a teenager. And then because it's now clear that there are existential threats on every border, the Israeli public has unified and understands the level of the threat. So there is something to the idea that an existential threat directed at a democracy helps unify the people who exist inside that democracy.
And maybe the rise in the discourse about economy and even gender in Israel is due to the fact that to the fact that this conflict is here to stay. I mean, Ehud Barak once defined it as the villa in the jungle. And then he offered to evacuate half the villa, but it's a different issue. And for many years, Israelis wanted to actually, they stared from the window of the villa through the jungle. They spoke about the animals, the snakes, the elephants, etc. And all of a sudden, during the Arab Spring that turned to an Islamic winter, they found out that no matter what they want, even if they evacuate half the villa, they will never get peace from the jungle. And then they started to speak about the villa, about the electricity prices, the window, etc. So I want to ask you, how can Israelis seriously discuss economy when the discourse is focused on the Palestinian question? I mean, how can you expect Likud not to join forces with the unions when it should try and get support to annex the territories, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, again, Israel is sort of an odd political constellation of forces. In the United States, the traditional sort of characterization of U.S. politics has been that the right is social conservatives, economic liberals, and foreign policy hawks, and the left is the reverse of all those positions. In Israel, you have this sort of bizarre situation where you have folks who are economically, very much to the left, but socially very much to the right. Right? You have heavy welfare dependence in Haredi communities and also in Arab communities, and this crosses, all sorts of boundaries, and that creates a lot of cross currents that are very difficult to navigate. My recommendation for a long time when it comes to Israel is that Israelis need to start seeing economics as a national security issue, that they actually need to link the two. So I think that what you're talking about is a sort of de-linkage in which, okay, well, we have to make concessions here, we have to make concessions there in order to solidify security in Yehuda v'Shomron. And the reality is that if you want to solidify security in Yehuda v'Shomron, you actually need a stronger economy. If you want a more aggressive foreign policy, if you want a policy that is stronger in the face of predators, you need a stronger economy that is rooted in the vitality of the Israeli people. And this is, to me, the single biggest takeaway that, as an American, I have for Israelis. Israel has for a very long time counted like Blanche Dubois in Streetcar Named Desire on the kindness of strangers. We'll go around and we'll sort of beg everybody to be nice to us, and the nicer we are, maybe the nicer they'll be to us. The reality is that as Israel is now seeing with regard to the Sunnis, everything in foreign policy is a power game. And Israel has a couple of resources at its disposal. Obviously, its military is one, but that's a last resort. The first resource at its disposal is this unbelievable IQ. Right? Israel has unbelievable skill sets. Israel has an incredible group of people who are highly educated and willing to work and incredibly innovative. And not unleashing that in order to solidify Israel's place on the world stage is such an unbelievable mistake. No matter whether you are Arab or whether you are Haredi, no matter what you are, if you wish to see a stronger Israel, the first thing you have to do is recognize that in a competitive world, you must strengthen your own economy. It's a lesson Biden is not learning right now in foreign conflict. It's something that Israel should pick up on.
By the way, no one, I mean, many people criticize Joe Biden for shaking hands with the ruler of Saudi Arabia, who actually murdered the Khashoggi journalist. But a day before, Biden shook hands with Mahmoud Abbas, who actually murdered a journalist and funds hundreds of terrorists and murderers, and no one said a word.
Which demonstrates, by the way, that whenever you see the media in the United States particularly ranting and raving about moral questions, it's very rarely about moral questions. It's usually them telescoping their own perceived politics into a moral question that they're sort of making up. I mean, Joe Biden fist-bumping with MBS. Is MBS a wonderful person who you'd want to babysit your children? Probably not. Is MBS a leader who's actually attempting to modernize his own country and make peace with the Jews for the first time in the history of the state of Israel? Yes, he is. And the same people in the media who are criticizing Biden for fist-bumping MBS, listen, there are a lot of reasons to criticize Biden for fist-bumping MBS. I mean, it's politically tone-deaf, that we wouldn't, the United States wouldn't be reliant on Saudi oil if you would allow people to drill, all the rest of that. But the same people who are criticizing this are also in favor of Joe Biden making concessions to the Iranian terror state, which has subsidized the murder of some 2,000 American soldiers in Iraq. So there is no moral ground for them to stand on here.
I'm sorry. And one thing for sure, Yuval Dayan, the singer, would have never shaken MBS hands. Anyway, this is the singer that didn't shake Biden's hands. Anyway, he spoke about the economy and actually the idea of free markets. But then 5 minutes later, he spoke about the need for the United States to actually hug religion. And in Israel, many people wonder how you could support free market as a right-winger and then tax Israelis for actually having budgets for Jewish religion.
Okay.
How do you settle those two contradicting ideas?
So, I mean, obviously, public education at a baseline ought to have elements of Judaism in a Jewish state. If you're talking about the conflict in terms of subsidization of yeshivas, for example.
Synagogues, yeshivas.
Yeah, I mean, I largely disagree with that policy of the Israeli government. As a religious Jew, I think that it's a mistake for the religious community to be reliant on any state for its survival, including for subsidization. And I sympathize greatly with segments of the Israeli population who are sending their kids off to join IDF and then spending their taxpayer dollars to subsidize people who won't fight in the IDF. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, let's talk judiciary. There is a phenomenon in the States where the left found out recently that judicial activism is bad. All of a sudden, welcome to the club. Now, I want to ask you, I mean, are we against judicial activism because it is bad or because it is used against us?
Well, I mean, I'm against...
Because in 10 years from now, I mean, the right wing will have a majority in Israel's Supreme Court.
So I'm against judicial activism because that's not the role of a judiciary. So I fundamentally disagree that, for example, the overturning of Roe versus Wade is an act of judicial activism. It's not. If the definition of judicial activism is just overturning precedent, then it has no meaning, because very often courts overturn precedent. The real question is whether there's even an attempt to read the law that's being construed.
Exactly.
If it is just a court that's deciding that its own politics trump whatever the law says, then you've got a real problem. And this is a major problem in Israel, obviously, because at least in the United States, we have a written constitution they can refer to when they're deciding what fundamental principles look like. In Israel, it seems the Supreme Court just makes up whatever the fundamental principles are and calls it basic law.
But, well, I don't think anyone here has to be convinced that our system of judges selection is good. But I'm not sure the American way of doing the same thing is not even worse than that. I mean, when we take a look at the US Supreme Court, all we see is yet another branch of the parliament. I mean, the Republicans vote for conservative decisions and the Democrats vote against. Can't we find something which is better than that?
No. And the reason
Okay,
that you, I mean,
thank you.
and the reason that you can't is because whenever people purport to appoint allegedly objective and independent people, those people are never actually objective and independent. If you appoint an AG by third parties, it's very rare that that person is actually going to be objective and independent in any way. And if you appoint a Supreme Court by people who are politically motivated, but they are outside of government, doesn't make them any less political. It's just a ruse. It's a sort of mythology that you've created around the Supreme Court that's apolitical when you have the justices, along with the Bar Association, picking. I'd rather at least have the transparency of knowing that when I vote for political parties, that through the system, at least there's some level of responsivity over time.
Okay. You spoke a lot about hatred and anti-Semitism, almost as a rule of history, and it's true, you know, many Jews in Germany of the 20th century or Spain of the 15th century felt that this is their home, that they are free citizens, that they live in a peaceful empire, and then they found the Holocaust or the Inquisition, etc. And I want to ask you bluntly, do you ever wonder if one day you'll have to flee the United States?
I mean, I think that every Jew throughout world history who has a brain and knows history has always wondered if a country that is not a Jewish state is going to eternally provide them security guarantees and full citizenship, of course. I mean, that's I think to think that that's why the existence of the State of Israel is the single greatest guarantor of my loyalty to the United States, frankly. Right? Because Israel exists, that means the United States is going to be a more welcoming place for me, because Israel is there as a backstop in case anything should go wrong.
But I feel you try to dodge the question. So I'll ask it bluntly. Why won't you make Aliyah to the State of Israel?
Because
you can take the night to think about it, by the way.
Because the fundamental principles of the United States are good, eternally good, and worth upholding. And my fight to do that as a Jew is deeply important, not just to people who are not Jewish, but particularly to Jews. So in other words, my Jewish mission does not conflict with my presence in the United States, or my citizenship in the United States, or my loyalty to the United States.
Shouldn't Jews live in the State of Israel?
Shouldn't all Jews live in the State of Israel?
All the Jews.
Jews should live where they can do the most, where they can be a light to the nations. And for me, as a person with millions and millions of followers in the United States, promoting what I think are values that are eternally good, living in the United States is a point of I think, morality for me.
Okay. Let's talk about a fresh topic, Donald J. Trump. In 2016, you were almost a non-Trumper or a never-Trumper, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't vote for Donald J. Trump.
Right.
You didn't vote for Hillary Clinton.
No.
No. To this lady from the Green Movement, isn't it? Anyway, in 2020, you voted for Trump. Why didn't you vote for him in the first place, and what changed your mind?
Okay, so I gave several reasons for not voting for Trump in 2016. One was Donald Trump's deep and abiding character flaws, which have not been alleviated at all. The second is that Donald Trump was extraordinarily unclear about what he actually was going to do politically. So he was on all sides of every issue with equal passion. Right? So he would say on the one hand that, I think that we should be definitely defending our friends in Israel, and then he'd be like, America should never spend money on foreign, with the exact same amount of passion, right? This was his shtick. And so my math was essentially, I object to everything that is happening in 2016. That was my math. My math was, and I didn't live in a swing state to be granted. I was living in California, so my vote really didn't matter anyway. But with that said, the basic calculus was that if I didn't vote in that election, then as a public figure, I had made clear my disdain for all available candidates. Trump came in, and he governed way more effectively and way more conservatively than I thought he was going to.
But just a second. Let's stop before 2020.
Sure.
How was it? You have an empire. You have built an amazing empire. Weren't you worried, even publicly, that by not supporting Trump, you lose your audience and revenues?
Of course. I mean, but that's why the kind of silly notion that people were taking a position not to vote, that was done for the money. Absolutely untrue. I mean, I took the position in 2016 because I fundamentally objected to the candidates that had been presented to the American public in 2016.
And you paid a price for that.
100%, yeah. I mean, I lost a job for that in 2016 with Breitbart. That math changed. I mean, when the evidence changes, if you don't change your mind, then you're not doing your job. And the evidence changed with regard to President Trump. President Trump came into office. He selected a bunch of justices who I thought were going to do a good job on the bench. The day that he selected Neil Gorsuch, I literally put a MAGA hat on air. You know, President Trump obviously moving the embassy to Jerusalem was a massive, massive move. His sponsorship and negotiation of the Abraham Accords was an incredible history-changing move. He did a lot of things that I really liked. So when it came to 20, and that combined with the fact that the left completely and utterly lost their mind in the United States between 2016 and 2020 made my decision a lot easier come 2020.
And then came 2021, January 6th. And when you see these horrifying pictures of people storming the Capitol Hill, sorry.
It wasn't the best, guys.
Don't you think Democrats might have been right about with some of their criticism towards Donald J. Trump?
I mean, so
that's your answer, but what's Ben's answer?
Again, I said that I thought that he had deep and abiding character flaws in 2016. My opinion of his deep and abiding character flaws were not changed by his diarrheic addiction to Twitter. No, I mean, I don't, like, almost nothing about my opinion about Donald Trump changed at any point as sort of a human being. My opinions only changed as far as what policy I thought he was going to implement, and then how durable I thought the constitutional boundaries were. And I thought that I will say, I think it is a major misstatement of fact to declare, as most of the world media has done, that the United States was on the verge of having its democracy overthrown on January 6th. I think it's absurd. You had 200, 300 morons who went into the Capitol building attempting to do harm to people. They were cleared out within 2 hours. The vote took place under the auspices of Donald Trump's vice president, Mike Pence, and the auspices of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Donald Trump's party. People like Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, Republican Secretary of State, election officials in Arizona and Pennsylvania, Republican Secretaries of State, were rejecting him at every turn. The courts rejected all of his legal complaints. Does that mean that Trump acted well between November 4th and January 6th? I thought he acted horribly between November 4th and January 6th. I think that he was saying things that were not true. But the notion that Donald Trump was presenting a unique threat to the entire democracy, the most durable democracy in modern world history, is absurd. We were at no point in danger of the democracy being overthrown by a dumbass wearing bullhorns in the Capitol building, put his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. It's ridiculous.
So it's yet another protest in the United States of America. That's what you're saying to me, the January 6th.
I mean, we had an entire summer in which major cities burned in 2020, and nobody in the media seemed to care. So the answer, by the way, that's not an answer for both, it's an answer for neither, meaning both of those things are super bad, right? And people who facilitate those things are doing something wrong. It's bad when Kamala Harris tries to bail out rioters in the middle of the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020, and it's bad when Donald Trump declares that the rioters of January 6th are fundamentally doing something patriotic. That's not true.
Okay. What do you think about what former Israeli ambassador to the US, Ron Dermer, once said, that Israel should put its political fortune on the evangelist community rather than on the Reform Jewish community?
I mean, just as a matter of blunt fact, that's true. I mean, it's an unfortunate reality of life in the United States that Reform Judaism as a branch does not see Jewish identity in a serious way as central. It's a very simple rubric for me. If as a Jew, right, if as a Jew, your values are more in line with same-sex marriage, transgenderism, and abortion than they are with, for example, the safety and security of the State of Israel, I have serious questions about how you think about yourself as a Jew. And so if I'm looking at who's more likely to back Israel, by polling data, Jews in the United States are the single most atheistic group of quote-unquote religious people anywhere. It's because Jews obviously
Save North Korea, I think.
What was that?
Save North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, what's weird about Jewish identity, obviously, is it has an ethnic side because halakhically Jews are ethnically Jewish, and then it has a religious side. So when people self-identify as Jews in the United States, that doesn't actually mean that they do anything that has anything to do with Judaism. It means that their last name ends in Berger-Steen or something. And you know, there are a lot of people whose last names end with Berger-Steen who fundamentally reject nearly all Jewish values and are secular leftists, and so they vote like secular leftists.
We're approaching to the questions from the audience, but I have one last question. from me. You quoted Hamilton, I think, so I want to quote the play Hamilton. Do you one day want to be part, or you want to be in the room where it happens? To be a candidate for a vice president, president?
That sounds like hell. Number one, running for office is a garbage business. You have to ask a bunch of people that you don't care very much about for large sums of money in order to run a campaign in which you have to fib about your core positions. And then if you win, you have to hang out in Washington, D.C. with politicians. All of this sounds horrifying. My life is pretty wonderful. I get to spend nearly all my time with my family. I get to say what I want for a living, and I get to pay, and I'm paid richly for doing so. So I'll stick with that at least until... I'll stick with that at least until I'm 38 right now. I'll stick with that at least until I'm of the average age of our president, so that gives me like 7 or 8 decades.
But I didn't hear a no. Okay. Okay, questions from the audience. Daniel from Long Island, New York. Are you here? Regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict, what is the solution?
I mean, there is none, is the answer. And the Palestinian Authority is a terrorist group, Hamas is a terrorist group, Islamic Jihad is a terrorist group, and attempts to negotiate with terrorist groups are likely to end in failure.
Ben Amsalem from the great city of Ashdod asks, how do you see the relationship between Israel and the US 10 years from now?
So I think that there's a massive political realignment taking place in the United States that is putting the Republican Party in a much stronger position than it has been maybe at any point in my lifetime. The realignment of Hispanic Americans particularly into the Republican camp, the turning of the Republican Party into a party of sort of cross-racial working class people is fundamentally changing how politics works in the United States. And as the Republican Party gets stronger, I am hopeful both that it will govern because it is an extraordinarily pro-Israel party, and also I'm hoping that the Democratic Party will learn its lesson and start moving to the right also. I mean, they can react in one of two ways to loss. They can either start moving more into the camp of the progressives, become more anti-Israel, or they can learn that they're going to get shellacked repeatedly until they start acting more moderate. And if they start acting more moderate, then hopefully even the Democratic Party will go back to a time when we had 2 pro-Israel parties in the United States.
David from San Fernando Valley asks, how do you manage pretty well the balance between learning Torah and being from and still taking in all the pop culture?
I mean, obviously, I don't learn enough Torah, and I take in too much pop culture. The answer to me is that I read incessantly, and thank God for Shabbat for a variety of reasons, including the fact that I spend an enormous amount of time both with my kids and reading on Shabbat, so that helps a lot.
Okay. One last question. Leah from Modi'in asks, what advice would you give to someone today who is looking to develop and expand horizons within an established industry as you were when starting the Daily Wire?
So you have to find a market advantage. In the United States, there's a real hole on the right when we started the Daily Wire in terms of right-wing media outlets. Basically, there's a monopoly for Fox News. There were a couple of big sort of right-wing websites like Drudge Report, which used to be a lot more right-wing. And we spotted an opening. We also were sort of first movers in the podcast industry. So I'll tell you, when we first constructed our business plan for Daily Wire, our projections were that we were going to make most of our money off programmatic ads run on the website based on sheer traffic. And I think we had slated my podcast to have maybe after a couple of years, 150, 200,000 downloads a day.
You have a podcast?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, amazing. And obviously now the podcast does a multiple of that. It has somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million downloads a day. So we were... I think the key is you have to have a very consolidated decision-making process. We're not a publicly traded company. We don't intend on becoming a publicly traded company. We're not going to make ourselves subject to ESG and DEI requirements. And so because we have a very tight top structure, that means we can move really quickly and really aggressively, both on issues that we really care about and with business strategies we think are going to work.
Okay. And you think it can work in Israel? It's a way narrower field. Only, I think, 8 million Hebrew readers worldwide.
I mean, I do think that there is room for a significantly more robust right-wing media presence in Israel, for sure, for sure. Okay. I'm not giving any hints, but we'll have to think about it over at Daily Wire.
Absolutely. Ben Shapiro, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Ben, before you go, one thing. It is my honor to thank you on behalf of our audience tonight, Tel Aviv Yer HaKodesh, and on behalf of the Am Yisrael Foundation. It's an honor to gift you with this. This is a real treasure of the Jewish people. It is a segula, a prayer book given to Haganah soldiers in 1948 during the war for the Battle of Yerushalayim, defending against her enemies. Thank you for your constant support of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. It is also my honor to bring to the stage my friend, the tzaddik, Rabbi Shlomo Katz, Rav of Shirat David in Efrat, for Hatikva. So please stay standing.
Kolod balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homiya ulfatei mizrach kadima Ayin letzion tzofia Od lo avda tikvateinu Hatikva bat shnot alpayim להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ Zion, Yerushalayim. We tie our two destinies together, and with hearts wide open, and with thanks to Hashem for a shaliach like Ben Shapiro in the world, and to all of you that are here, I invite you to please sing and pray with me. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח אני מאמין אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח אני מאמין ואף על פי שיתמהמה עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא בכל יום שיבוא we could do it stronger ואף עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא בכל יום שיבוא.
Everyone, thank you from Tel Aviv, and have a beautiful evening. Am Yisrael Chai.